Good afternoon again. It's a little bit after 12:30, so I think we have a very interesting program to go through. So even though you're not finished eating, I think we'll get started. It's my pleasure to introduce this afternoon Tate Mason, who is the director of the World Center for the Birds of Prey. And Tate grew up in the Northwest, devoted to the outdoors, and studied biology at Western Washington University, and then earned a master's degree in ornithology from Boise State. In working as an ornithologist, primarily studying owls and songbird, Tate recognized the critical importance of engaging the general public with objectives of scientific research. With a passion to conserve biodiversity around the world, Tate now serves as the director of the Peregrine Fund World Center for Birds of Prey in Boise. He also serves on the board of directors for the Idaho Environmental Education Association and is the president-elect of the Boise Museum Association. So Tate, thank you.
Thank you so much. How's everybody doing today? Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? Check. Okay, excellent. Thank you guys so much for having me out today, or having us out. I've got a couple of colleagues with me as well. Heather Millman, who's our director of campaigns and is is heading up an expansion of the World Center for Birds of Prey, and Mike Garretts, who's a raptor specialist, master falconer, former president of the Idaho Falconers Association. So we're going to bring their expertise into this talk as well. How many of y'all know the World Center for Birds of Prey? So there's a good familiarity, and so we are the headquarters of the Peregrine Fund. And the Peregrine Fund is a nonprofit that was put together back in 1970 to save the Peregrine Falcon. Since that time, we've worked with birds all over the world. And so by all over the world, I mean 65, 66 countries around the world, over 100 species of raptors. But even that needs revising, because in our current strategic plan, we are working with every raptor all around the world. Depending on how you measure it, that's 586 species, or maybe upwards of 590. We've developed this global raptor app where biologists around the world are entering the information that they are collecting, and that is coming back to us here in Boise, Idaho, and allowing us to do analyses about population statuses of birds of prey. Therefore, we can react more quickly if a species becomes imperiled. So, therefore, we are really working in every country around the world. So when we got together about 2 years ago, we made a new strategic plan for the Peregrine Fund. We thought to ourselves, are we doing enough? Are we going to be meeting the needs of birds of prey all around the world? Or are we going to see extinctions happening, in the sense that the world is changing so fast, habitats are changing so fast, climate change is a real threat to distributions of birds of prey? And is the Peregrine Fund situated to meet that? And we thought that we have been doing a good job so far, but there's more that we could be doing. And so our hallmark has always been saving species, saving individual species. And that model is like what I like to call conservation in crisis. Like, if we don't do something, this bird is going to go extinct. That's how we started with the Peregrine Falcon. But we recognize that while that's a component of our mission, we need to get ahead of the game as well. We need to make sure that species don't become imperiled. And therefore, we're conserving areas of high conservation value to birds of prey. And that's all around the world, exemplified by some of our work in Madagascar and our current work in Panama in the Darien rainforest. where we're looking to conserve harpy eagles and the incredible ecosystem upon which they rely. Of course, we're also addressing landscape-level threats. There are threats to birds of prey that are pervasive all around the world. Think about power lines or wind turbines. Both of those things historically have been problematic for birds of prey. Persecution, people just shooting birds of prey, very common historically in this country and still very common around the world. That's a landscape-level threat. Tom Cade founded the Peregrine Fund. Did anybody know Tom Cade? Tom Cade passed away just about 2 weeks ago, and he was the visionary behind the Peregrine Fund, our founding chairman and CEO. He was a professor of ornithology at Cornell, Cornell's Lab of Ornithology, and he came out here in 1984, largely because of this man here. Do you recognize Morley Nelson? Morley and Tom were early friends and colleagues in the sport of falconry. And Morley brought Tom to Idaho and really personified what we need to do to conserve raptors around the world. Morley Nelson was such a force for good for birds of prey. And I think that these two single-handedly saved this bird, the peregrine falcon. Right on cue. Where is it? So we brought a peregrine falcon for you guys to see here today. How many of you all have seen a peregrine falcon? Okay, most of you, good. This one is going to be a little bit different because it's a different subspecies. So peregrine falcons are found on every continent around the world except for Antarctica. So they have a global distribution. I think there's over 15 subspecies of peregrine falcons, so peregrine falcons that will look unique. And this is a rare subspecies from Patagonia, from South America, called a pallid peregrine, a pallid falcon. By 1975, there were 39 pairs of peregrine falcons left in the United States. There were just 39 pairs, probably under 100 birds in the continental United States. They were on their way to extinction. At that point, they were gone east of the Mississippi River. And what Tom did was he figured out how to breed falcons in captivity at scale. So it had been done before. People had two peregrine falcons and they had laid a clutch of eggs and they'd raised those birds, but nobody had ever done it to the point where a species could be saved. And so a captive population was started by Tom at Cornell's Lab of Ornithology that later moved to Fort Collins, Colorado, and then came here to Boise in 1984. So the peregrine falcon is the fastest creature on planet Earth. It was clocked at over 242 miles an hour in 2005. They are a bird eater. They are eating mostly other birds. People will call them sometimes duck hawks. And they're one of the most prized birds in the sport of falconry. So the sport of falconry, of course, hunting with a trained bird of prey. And a peregrine falcon could even take prey as large as a Canada goose, or at least Morley Nelson says. So the peregrine falcon was listed as an endangered species in 1973. It was the first endangered species. And fortunately, it came off the endangered species list in 1999. It was considered recovered. That celebration happened right here in Boise at the World Center for Birds of Prey, the delisting ceremony, really a real point of pride for us here in Idaho. Of course, the trouble was DDT. And if you think about that, that's another landscape level threat, a threat that was all over the world as after World War II, we spent so much effort in controlling insect populations, and DDT took out the ability of so many birds of prey to reproduce. And about 30 years of not being able to reproduce was about what it took to put the peregrine falcon on the critically endangered list. Of course, DDT was also banned in the early 1970s. That paved the way for the recovery of the bald eagle. The bald eagle was also in trouble not only from persecution, from people shooting the birds, but also from DDT. That was the main threat. Bald eagles could not reproduce in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And then when DDT removed from the landscape, bald eagles have come back, and they've made a stellar recovery. They were taken off the endangered species list in 2007. I think these two stories, the peregrine falcon and the bald eagle, are the two most successful conservation stories of all time. They are, the peregrine in particular is a globally distributed species. And so the people of planet Earth had to agree on what the problem was and how to fix it. And through the efforts of people like Tom and Morley, they were able to get that consensus. And they were able to move the species to recovery. And it worked. And there was not as much, well, there may have been some infighting, but the result was so powerfully beneficial to these birds. So the biggest project that the Peregrine Fund has going right now is with the California condor. The condor is North America's largest bird. In 1985, there were 22 of them left. Just 22 individual birds. They were on their way to extinction. By 1987, every last condor was removed from the landscape and brought into captivity. They were in a zoo-like setting. First, the San Diego and Los Angeles zoos, and in 1993, they came here to Boise, Idaho, to the World Center for Birds of Prey. We now have the largest captive breeding program for condors in the world right here. We have a little over 60, maybe 65 individual birds here off South Cole Road at the World Center for Birds of Prey. And every year, these birds make between 15 and 20 young, which are released back into the wild to bolster that population. So if you think about it, just 22 individual birds, and we've brought them back now to about 500 individuals on planet Earth, less in captivity than there are in the wild. They're in California, they're in Baja, Mexico, Arizona, and in southern Utah. That's where the condors are now. And sometimes I think about the recovery of the peregrine falcon and the historical context of that, the historical importance of it, and how Tom and Morley were able to bring about this amazing recovery project. How profound that is. Our next challenge, especially in North America, with birds of prey in particular, is the California condor. This species is on the doorstep of recovery, but it's going to take everybody working together to recover the species. And why I say everybody is because the issue with the condor is lead poisoning. These guys are eating spent lead ammunition out of animals that have been shot. And so if we can figure out how to keep the condors from ingesting lead, they will recover. This is our biggest bird in North America. And that recovery is attainable, but it's going to take a lot of cooperation. So at the World Center for Birds of Prey, this is the headquarters of our education program. We recognize that the recovery of these species is going to take all of us. It's going to take people working together for a common goal. People need to be inspired. People need to care about why these birds are important. And the place where we seed that interest in so many people is right here at the World Center for Birds of Prey. We bring over 5,000 students on field trips every year, and we introduce them to condors. We introduce them to peregrine falcons, nose to beak. We also host 50,000 people every year through our doors and inspire people to take action to benefit birds of prey. Now, Heather's going to come up and talk just a little bit about the direction of the World Center for Birds of Prey, because we are looking to scale up our impact at a level that will be effective to saving birds going forward.
Thanks, Tate. My name is Heather Millman, and thank you so much for having us today. One of the things that we do very well at the World Center is tactile experiences. So I brought a few brochures that I just want to pass around so you can have a visual representation of some of what we're talking about. So I've been with the Peregrine Fund since November of 2017. I came on board to direct an expansion project. So for the World Center, a little bit of history. We moved here in '84 with the help of Morley Nelson, and one of our early champions was Velma Morrison, who absolutely fell in love with our birds and fell in love with this program. And when we showed up in Boise, a lot of people didn't know what we were doing. What's going on up there on the hill? Well, we were breeding peregrine falcons off the endangered species list, but there was no outward-facing component to share that story, to share the methodology, and also to inspire people to love and want to care for these apex predators in our environment. So with her help in 1994, we opened the World Center for Birds of Prey, and the Interpretive Center is aptly named after her. And since that time, we have had nearly 1 million visitors come through our doors, and 500,000 of those are students, and that's both on grant-funded field trips. I know that Tate was just mentioning field trips. Those are all free for students and teachers to bring their classrooms up to for approximately 90 minutes to 2 hours, where folks bring 60 to 90 kids up. We watch a kestrel free fly inside of our classroom. We teach kids the scientific process by asking questions and making observations. And kids walk away with an understanding that critical thinking is a component that's important to the rest of their lives. We recognize the fact that every student that comes through our doors is not going to become a raptor biologist, unfortunately, right? We could always use more of those. But those skills of being a scientist and understanding the scientific process carry on a lifetime. I was talking to a woman just last week who said to me, my kids, they're 25, 30 years old, they're out in the workforce now, and they can remember that experience of coming to the World Center for Birds of Prey like it was yesterday. So it's something that really does impact a child for their entire life. The brochure that I passed around, the title of it is very very telling. It's the best place to see conservation in action. So what the World Center for Birds of Prey does is we inspire people through up-close personal encounters with birds of prey. You just met Schmidt, our peregrine falcon, and I think we're going to introduce you to Oliver, our Eurasian, or our Barose or milky eagle owl here in a second. When we bring science to life for curious minds of all ages, it's about caring for nature, right? How do we make that connection? Think about the kind of bond that you have with your dog or cat or whatever animal you have at your house. I mean, that is an unbreakable bond. And we see these transformations every day at the World Center, where folks come in, they get to meet these incredible birds of prey up close and personal and understand why it's so important to protect them and how it relates to us, because ultimately the environments that we are protecting as a result of conserving birds of prey worldwide, those are also impacting humans in a very positive way as well. So after, I know, once we bring Oliver out, it doesn't matter what I say. This is Oliver, our verbose or milky eagle owl. He just turned 1 year old on January 21st, is that right? Yeah, and he came to us from Zoo Atlanta, where he was hatched, and his first flight was on Delta Airlines at 41 days old, and he has been with us ever since. Oliver is an ambassador. He's what we call an avian ambassador. He's one of the superstars of our flight show, Fall Flights, which happens in September and October every year up at the World Center every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 3 o'clock. Mark your calendars. It's one of the great outreach programs that we have. We have about 7,000 people that come up just for Fall Flights every year. And a lot of people who've never been up before say, oh, I'm sure we're going to see them flying up in the sky. No, people are getting wingtipped. I mean, you get a really up close and personal experience of watching a raptor fly right above your head. So, back to Velma's vision, bringing science education and methodology from a global environmental conservation powerhouse that's located right here in the Treasure Valley. After 25 years, we recognize the fact that our calendared maintenance is simply not enough. So we are undergoing an educational expansion of the World Center for Birds of Prey that will help us increase our visitation by 100%. So we'll have over 100,000 visitors. We'll be able to serve 10,000 plus students. We're anticipating that this project will take about 5 years to complete. It will include a new welcome center that will help better tell the story of Morley Nelson and Tom Cade and what brought us here to Boise in the first place. We're lucky enough to have a passenger pigeon in our collection, in our specimen collection, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with the passenger pigeon, but it's been extinct for approximately 100 years. I think it's 103 years now. But 100 years ago, there were billions of them, 5 billion in the United States. They would eclipse the sun for 6 hours at a time. This was an incredibly abundant species, which due to overhunting it fell into extinction in 50 years. We're going to have that specimen on display to show, there is a tremendous amount of hope for species, and our science-based approach is incredibly effective at making that change. But we have to be able to make those choices, and we have to make good choices that impact us and the birds of prey and the wildlife that exists in the ecosystems around us. It will also include 11 outdoor exhibits that really focus on coexistence, right? So let's take the example of Idaho Power. Idaho Power, and with the help of Morley Nelson, they partnered to be the first that came out and said, hey, I think we can do something about hawk electrocutions. So understanding that we can make simple changes, we can wrap a wire on a power line, we can build power lines so that the lines are far enough apart so that a bird is not able to fly, to have 2 feathers touch 2 different lines at the same time. 20% of power outages are due to wildlife encounters, and that's a U.S. Department of Energy fact, and 100% of those are preventable. Idaho Power has done a tremendous job and is a world leader in wildlife protection in this area. They have gone on to spread this technology to several continents and have really been very successful at bringing down the number of hawk electrocutions continental-wide and across a number of continents. So I could talk about this forever. We are beginning this campaign in a fairly public way pretty soon, but I would love to know if you have any questions about the World Center for Birds of Prey expansion, and I would be happy to answer those. I also have a few brochures here that have some more renderings that I would be happy to share with you as well. This is about committing to education for the next 25 years and helping hundreds of thousands of students and engaging hundreds of thousands of visitors in this very unique asset that we have here in the Treasure Valley. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather. Just want to say again, thank you guys all for having us out here today. We really appreciate your attention and including us in this really neat event that you have going on. I'd like to open up the floor to any questions at all about what we are doing or where we're going. Sure, it's called a Verreaux's eagle owl. And across Africa, they're known as different things. They're also known as a giant eagle owl or a milky eagle owl. And it is the largest owl on the continent of Africa. They're found in sub-Saharan Africa, mostly in the savannas. I think of areas where you might see lions or giraffes. And up in that acacia tree that the giraffe is nibbling on, there's a Verreaux's eagle owl up there. That's his habitat. So we just have one Verreaux's eagle owl. So it's oftentimes a little bit confusing because we do captive breeding and releases of endangered species like California condors, but a Verreaux's eagle owl is not an endangered species. This is a species that came from a zoo environment. So both of his parents live at the Atlanta Zoo in Georgia, and they have young, and we have an education program that could utilize a Verreaux's eagle owl. And so we were able to arrange that bird to come to Idaho, not in order to release back into the wild, but in order to engage people with our mission. Yes? Now, you said we've released birds back into California and Arizona, but is who developing a program of their own? The condors? Oh, how are they doing on their own? So the condors are not achieving the level of reproduction in the wild that's offsetting mortality. So the mortality in the wild is much higher than the rate of reproduction. So the population is going down, except there are 4 breeding programs in North America, the largest one here, and we are producing more and offsetting that mortality by putting young birds back out onto the landscape. Recovery of the condor will take place once the reproduction outstrips mortality in the wild, and the wild population is growing. That's where we need to go. The reason that's not happening is because of chronic lead poisoning on the landscape. So the birds are eating lead and not surviving long enough to reproduce.
Well, thank you, Tate, very much for the presentation.